The experience of Russia in World War II was a harsh one. The year 1941 saw the entire western portion of that country overrun by the Nazis. From the region of the Volga River westward, almost everything was destroyed. When we flew into Russia in 1945, I did not see a house standing. Through this overrun region, Marshal Zhukov told me, so many numbers of women, children, and old men had been killed that the Russian government would never be able to estimate the total. Some of their great cities had been laid waste, and until November of 1942, there seemed little hope that their desperate defense could hold off the enemy until their industries could be rehabilitated and the Western Allies could get into the war in force. All of this would have embittered any people. It would have been completely astonishing if the Russians had not had a more direct and personal vindictiveness towards the Germans and a sterner attitude towards the realities of war than was the case in countries far removed from the scene of hostilities. During the war, I heard much of the magnificent defense of Leningrad in 1941 and in 1942. I expressed a desire to visit that city briefly. In the siege of Leningrad, 350,000 civilians died of starvation. Many more were killed and wounded. The extraordinary suffering of the population and the length of time that the city endured the rigors and privations of the battle combined to make the operation one of the memorable sieges of history. Certainly, it is without parallel in modern times. I know that in my personal reactions, as the months of conflict wore on, I grew constantly more bitter against the Germans, particularly the Hitler gang. On all sides there was always evidence of the destruction that Hitler's ruthless ambition had brought about. Every battle, every skirmish demanded its price in broken bodies and in the extinction of the lives of young Allied soldiers. During the war, hundreds of broken-hearted fathers, mothers, and sweethearts wrote me personal letters, begging for some hope that a loved one might still be alive, or, at the very least, for some additional detail as to the manner of his death. Every one of these I answered, and I know of no more effective means of developing an underlying hatred of those responsible for aggressive war than to assume the obligation of attempting to express sympathy to families bereaved by it. Possibly, therefore, I had a more sympathetic understanding of the Russian attitude than would have been possible before the beginning of the war. Our tremendous air force was now daily pulverizing the resources of the Germans' dwindling territory on an almost unendurable scale. Even Hitler, fanatic that he was, must have had lucid moments in which he could not have failed to see that the end was in sight. He was writing an ending to a drama that would far exceed the tragic climax anything that his beloved Wagner could ever conceive. Every railway train and every automobile that we sent into Berlin had to pass through Russian territory. Several times these were molested or even robbed by roving bands of individuals wearing the uniform of the Russian army. While talking to a Russian general, I mentioned the difficult problem that was imposed upon us at various periods of the war by the need to care for so many German prisoners. I remarked that they were fed the same rations as were our own soldiers. In the greatest astonishment, he asked, "Why did you do that?" I said, "Well, in the first place, my country was required to do so by the terms of the Geneva Convention. In the second place, the German had some thousands of American and British prisoners, and I did not want to give Hitler the excuse or justification for treating our prisoners more harshly than he was already doing. Again, the Russian seemed astounded at my attitude, and he said, "But what did you care about the men that the Germans had captured? They had surrendered and could not fight anymore." However, these statements did not necessarily mean that the Russians were cruel or were innately indifferent to human life. I informed the President of my belief that we should handle the German economy, and in particular the problem of reparations, in such a way as to ensure Germans an opportunity to make a living, provided that they were ready for work. Of this readiness there was no doubt. From the day we entered Germany, the willingness of the ordinary citizen to work from dawn to dark for a meager living was noticeable. Even before we crossed the Rhine, I had seen German women and their children in the fields, under sporadic gunfire, spading the ground and planting seed in order to produce some semblance of a crop that year. Even the bombed ruins of Germany suddenly seemed to provide but faint warning of what future war could mean to the people of the earth. No atomic bomb was used in the European theater, and none was ever planned for use there. However, in an instant many of the old concepts of war were swept away. Henceforth, it would seem, the purpose of an aggressor nation would be to stock atom bombs in quantity and to employ them by surprise against the industrial fabric and population centers of its intended victim. Freedom from fear and injustice and oppression will be ours only in the measure that men who value such freedom are ready to sustain its possession, to defend it against every thrust from within or without. We believe that individual liberty, rooted in human dignity, is man's greatest treasure. We believe that men, given free expression of their will, prefer freedom and self-dependence to dictatorship and collectivism. We who saw Europe liberated know that the communistic fear that men will cling to freedom is well-founded. It is possible that this truth may be the reason for what appears to be an aggressive intent on the part of the communists to tear down all governmental structures based upon individual freedom. If the men and women of America can retain the moral integrity, the clarity of comprehension, and the readiness to sacrifice that finally crushed the Axis, then the free world will live and prosper, and all peoples, eventually, will reach a level of culture, contentment, and security that has never before been achieved.